Imagine trusting your spouse with your life, only to discover they've been poisoning you. Not once, but 7 times. Catherine Herring had been married to Mason for years. They built a life together, raised 2 children, and seemed to have what many would call the perfect marriage. But behind closed doors, something was wrong. It started with a drink, one that looked a little off. Catherine took a sip, not thinking much of it. Within hours, she was violently ill. Stomach cramps, nausea, dizziness. She chalked it up to bad food, stress, or maybe the pregnancy itself. But then it happened again and again. Each time Mason was there, a concerned husband, always making sure she stayed hydrated, always bringing her drinks himself. But Catherine began noticing a pattern. The drinks were always cloudy. The sickness always came after, and Mason was always watching. Then one night, she made a discovery that sent a chill down her spine. Hidden in the trash was something she was never meant to find, an empty package of abortion medication. Her husband, the man she trusted, the father of her children, was trying to kill their unborn child. But what she didn't know yet was that he wasn't just targeting the baby, he was targeting her too. And by the time she uncovered the truth, she had already consumed poison 7 times. Before we get into the chilling details of this story, be sure to like this video and subscribe to Crime Scene for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless. Mason Herring was a man who had it all. A successful attorney in Texas, well-respected in legal circles, known for his sharp intellect and professionalism. His career was on an upward trajectory, earning the admiration of his colleagues and the trust of his clients. Outside the courtroom, he played the role of a devoted family man. To those who knew him, he appeared polished, composed, someone who had built a stable life. He was married to Catherine, a woman who had supported him through law school and beyond, standing by his side as he built his reputation. Together they had 2 children, a beautiful home, and the kind of life that seemed picture perfect. But appearances can be deceiving. Catherine was not just a wife, she was the foundation of their family, a loving mother dedicated to her children, balancing the demands of raising a family with the complexities of being married to a man whose career often took precedence. She had always been the kind of person who saw the best in people, especially Mason. She believed in their partnership, in the vows they had taken, in the idea that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together. For years, their marriage followed the expected course: celebrations, hardships, compromises. Like any couple, they had disagreements, but nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. There were no warning signs, no clear indications that something dark was festering beneath the surface. And then everything changed. The moment Catherine told Mason she was pregnant with their 3rd child, she expected the kind of reaction she had seen before. Excitement, maybe even a little surprise, but ultimately happiness. Another child, another addition to the family they had built together. But that's not what happened. Instead, Mason's entire demeanor shifted. The warmth in his voice was replaced by something distant, something cold. He didn't smile. He didn't hold her. He didn't celebrate. His words were careful, measured. He told her this wasn't the right time, that their marriage was already strained, that another child would complicate things. At first, Catherine assumed it was shock, that maybe he just needed time to process. After all, an unexpected pregnancy could be overwhelming. But as the days turned into weeks, his attitude didn't change. If anything, it got worse. He became more detached, more distant. Conversations grew shorter. His work hours became longer. He stopped asking how she was feeling, stopped showing interest in doctor's appointments, in the small milestones of early pregnancy. Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She wanted to believe that he would come around, that once he adjusted to the idea, he would return to being the husband she knew. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly imagined, was that Mason wasn't just unhappy about the pregnancy. He was planning to end it, and he wouldn't stop there. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Mason had never been the overly attentive type, but suddenly he started insisting that Catherine stay hydrated. He would remind her constantly, making sure she drank plenty of fluids, more than usual, and not just water. He began preparing special drinks for her, ones he claimed would help with the pregnancy. Electrolyte drinks, smoothies, fresh juice. At a time when she was already feeling exhausted, Catherine appreciated the extra effort. She had no reason to question his sudden concern. If anything, it seemed like he was finally starting to come around, accepting the reality of the pregnancy. But then, the sickness began. It started with waves of nausea, more severe than anything she had experienced in her previous pregnancies. At first, she thought it was normal, morning sickness, a common symptom, but this was different. Within minutes of drinking what Mason had given her, she would feel her stomach twist into painful knots. Then came the vomiting, uncontrollable and violent. She would break into cold sweats, her body weak, her head spinning. The first time she brushed it off. Maybe it was something she ate. Maybe it was just the stress of everything. But then it happened again and again. Each time it followed the same pattern. Mason would prepare her a drink, encourage her to sip it, and within hours she would be curled over in agony. At first she didn't connect the dots. She confided in a few close friends, telling them how awful she had been feeling. Most of them reassured her, it's probably just pregnancy symptoms, maybe a stomach bug, maybe dehydration. Mason played the role of the concerned husband perfectly. He would rub her back as she lay weak in bed. He would tell her how important it was to keep drinking fluids. He would offer to make her something that would help, and she believed him. But as the days passed, something started to feel off. The drinks Mason prepared had a strange appearance. Sometimes the liquid looked slightly cloudy, as if something had been mixed into it. At first, Catherine told herself she was imagining things. Maybe it was just the ingredients he was using. Maybe she was being paranoid. But the pattern was undeniable. Every time she drank what Mason gave her, she got sick. Still, she hesitated. She wanted to trust him. She needed to trust him. This was her husband, the father of her children. The idea that he could be the cause of her suffering, that he could be doing this intentionally, was too terrifying to fully accept. But that fear, that doubt, it wouldn't go away. So she decided to test her theory. The next time Mason prepared a drink for her, she didn't drink it right away. She set it aside. She waited. Hours passed and she felt fine. No nausea, no pain, nothing. Then when Mason wasn't looking, she poured it down the sink. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't get sick. That was the moment she knew. Something was terribly wrong, and she needed proof. Catherine decided to take matters into her own hands. She installed a small hidden camera in the kitchen, positioning it carefully so it would capture the counter where Mason usually prepared her drinks. It was a desperate move, one she never thought she would have to make, but deep down, she already knew what she was going to find. The next morning, Mason followed his usual routine. He walked into the kitchen, took a glass from the cabinet, and poured her a drink. But then, he hesitated. He glanced over his shoulder. When he was sure no one was watching, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out, a small packet. He tore it open and poured the contents into the glass. Then he stirred, carefully, methodically, until whatever he had added dissolved completely. Catherine felt her heart stop. She replayed the footage over and over again, hoping she had seen it wrong, hoping there was some other explanation. But there wasn't. The man she had trusted with her life had been poisoning her, and she needed to find out what exactly he was using. Determined, she searched the house, digging through the trash, through drawers, through every place Mason might have hidden something. And then, she found it. Crumpled at the bottom of the trash can was an empty package, a label printed across it in black ink. Mifepristone, a medication used to terminate pregnancies. Her blood ran cold. Mason hadn't just been trying to make her sick. He had been trying to kill their unborn child. And worse, if she hadn't figured it out in time, he might have killed her too. Catherine sat at the kitchen table, the hidden camera footage playing on her phone. She watched Mason on the screen, his careful movements, his glance over his shoulder, the way he poured the powder into her drink as if it were nothing. Her hands trembled as she picked up the crumpled pill packaging from the trash. The name on the label burned into her mind, Mifepristone. The reality of what he had been doing, what he had already done, was undeniable. She felt a rush of emotions, fear, rage, heartbreak. How could the man she had built a life with, the father of her children, be capable of something so monstrous? She took a deep breath. She had two choices. She could pretend she hadn't seen the footage, go to bed, and act like everything was normal. Or she could confront him. Right now. She chose the latter. That night, as Mason walked through the door, Catherine was waiting. The house was eerily silent, their two children already asleep. Mason barely glanced at her as he set down his briefcase. But then he noticed her expression. "Catherine?" he asked, his voice casual, like he didn't have a clue what was coming. She held up her phone, pressing play on the video. The footage spoke for itself. She watched as his face changed, his eyes darting between the screen and her face. For a split second, she saw panic. But then, just like that, it was gone. He let out a soft laugh. "What is this?" Catherine's grip tightened around the phone. "You tell me." Mason shook his head. "You really think I would do something like this? Come on, Catherine. This is crazy. You've been sick. You're not thinking straight." Gaslighting. He was trying to flip it on her. She didn't back down. "I found the pill package in the trash, Mason." A flicker of something, annoyance, fear. Then he scoffed. "I don't know where that came from. Maybe it's not even what you think it is." Her voice shook, but she forced herself to stay steady. "Then explain it to me." Mason sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "You've been under a lot of stress. We both have. Maybe you're misinterpreting things." He wasn't denying it outright anymore, but he wasn't admitting it either. Catherine knew she wasn't going to get a confession. Not here. Not now. She needed to go to the police. The next morning, while Mason was at work, Catherine gathered everything. The video footage, the pill packaging, even the drinks she had secretly saved in the fridge. Then she went to the authorities. The moment she walked into the police station, she felt the weight of everything she had been carrying crash down on her. She handed over the evidence, her voice shaking as she told them everything. The officers listened carefully, and then they got to work. Medical tests confirmed what Catherine already knew. Her system had traces of misoprostol, another abortion drug often used in combination with mifepristone. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was proof. An arrest warrant was issued, and Mason Herring, the well-respected Texas attorney, was about to face the consequences of his actions. When the police showed up at his office, Mason didn't put up a fight. He was calm, eerily so, as if he had expected this moment. But the real shock came when investigators dug deeper into his digital trail. His internet history painted a chilling picture. He had been researching abortion pills for weeks before Catherine ever got sick. He had read medical journals, online forums, even legal articles about how certain substances could be used to terminate pregnancies. And then there were the text messages. In one, he told a friend, "This wasn't supposed to happen. It's going to ruin everything." In another, "I don't know how to fix this." It was clear Mason hadn't just made a mistake in a moment of panic. This was deliberate, planned, calculated. And now the truth was out. The trial was nothing short of explosive. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the facts. They played the hidden camera footage for the jury, pausing at the exact moment Mason poured the powder into the drink. Catherine sat in the courtroom, her hands clenched in her lap. She didn't look away. She needed to see this through. The defense scrambled to spin the narrative. They tried to argue that Mason never intended to harm Catherine, only that he panicked over the pregnancy and made a poor decision. But that argument crumbled the moment Catherine took the stand. Her voice was strong, clear. "I trusted him with my life," she told the court, "and my baby's life, and he tried to destroy us both." The jury listened. The world listened. And in the end, the verdict was delivered. Mason was found guilty. But when the sentence was announced, 180 days in jail, Catherine felt a wave of disbelief. That was it? 6 months for poisoning his pregnant wife? For trying to kill their unborn child? For planning it, lying about it, and watching her suffer? The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. The public was outraged, but Mason barely reacted, as if, even now, he still thought he could walk away from this unscathed. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to read Mason Herring's sentence. Catherine sat motionless, her hands gripping the edge of the wooden bench, her heart pounding. She had relived this nightmare over and over again, watching the hidden camera footage, hearing the medical reports, replaying the moment she found the abortion pill packaging in the trash. She had trusted the system, believed that justice would be served. The prosecution had laid everything bare: the premeditation, the repeated poisonings, the blatant disregard for human life. She braced herself. The judge's voice cut through the silence. The court sentences Mason Herring to 180 days in county jail and 10 years of probation. Catherine blinked. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. 6 months? The air in the courtroom grew heavy. Murmurs spread through the gallery. Shock, confusion. Mason barely reacted. He stood still, hands clasped in front of him, eyes downcast. Catherine's breath hitched. She had prepared herself for a long, hard fight. But she had never imagined, never once, that he would walk away with 6 months behind bars and a decade of probation. As the news broke, the public response was swift and furious. Social media erupted. This man tried to kill his own wife and unborn child 7 times. 180 days? That's a slap on the wrist. A lawyer, no less. He knew exactly what he was doing. If roles were reversed, Catherine would be in prison for life. This sentence is an insult to every woman who has suffered at the hands of an abuser. Legal analysts dissected the case on every major news outlet. Some pointed out that Mason had no prior criminal record, that he had shown remorse, that Texas law gave judges discretion in sentencing, but others weren't buying it. He didn't act in a moment of panic, one legal expert stated in an interview. He did this repeatedly, over weeks. This was calculated. The fact that he's walking away with a mere 180 days is disturbing. Public outrage only grew when Catherine's victim impact statement was made public. She had stood before the court, her voice unwavering. He didn't just try to harm me, he tried to erase our child, 7 times. I wake up every day knowing that I was sleeping next to a man who was actively trying to kill our baby. And still, 6 months. The case struck a nerve, particularly with women's advocacy groups. Rallies were held outside the courthouse. People carried signs demanding harsher sentencing for attempted fetal homicide. But no appeal was filed. No retrial was granted. Mason Herring would serve 6 months, and then he would walk free. Catherine's life today is nothing like the one she imagined when she married Mason. She's raising her children alone. Her baby, the child Mason had tried so desperately to erase, was born prematurely. Doctors warned her of potential complications, developmental delays, lifelong medical concerns. Every time she looks at her child, she sees both a miracle and a reminder. The nightmares haven't stopped. The anxiety lingers. There are days when she wonders if she'll ever fully heal. But one thing is certain: Mason Herring may have served his time, but he will never again be the man she trusted. And no matter how light his sentence was, the world will never forget what he did. What do you think? Was 180 days in jail justice? Let us know in the comments below. 6 months. 180 days. That's the time Mason Herring will spend behind bars before he walks out into the world again, free to continue his life, free to rebuild. But what about Catherine? What about the child he tried to erase? What about the nights she wakes up in a cold sweat, replaying every moment she unknowingly put her life in his hands? For Catherine, there is no release date, no moment where she simply walks away from the trauma. The sentencing left many stunned. Legal experts, victims' advocates, and everyday people all asking the same question: how is this justice? As the news spread, frustration turned to fury. Social media was flooded with comments from outraged viewers. This is attempted murder. Why wasn't he charged accordingly? He planned this for weeks. He researched the pills. He knew what he was doing. If this was the other way around, Catherine would be locked up for life. Women get harsher sentences for drug possession. This man tried to kill his wife and child, and he gets a slap on the wrist? Legal professionals debated the case. Some pointed to gaps in the law. Others said it was simply a matter of judicial discretion. But to the public, the message was clear. Mason Herring got away with it. Advocacy groups called for change. Petitions demanding stricter sentencing for similar crimes gained traction. But for Catherine, the damage was already done. Her life will never be the same. She's a mother of 3 now, navigating the emotional and physical toll this ordeal left behind. Her baby, the child Mason tried to poison in the womb, survived. But at what cost? Premature birth meant complications. Doctors warned of potential developmental issues. Every milestone is shadowed by uncertainty. And Catherine, once a woman who believed in love, in partnership, in trust, is now a woman who looks over her shoulder. She moved out of their home, changed routines, took every measure to ensure Mason would never have access to her or her children again. But how do you truly escape someone who was willing to go to such lengths? How do you heal when the justice system tells you your suffering is worth only 6 months of your abuser's life? Was justice served? Now we turn the question to you. Was 180 days enough? Was probation a fair consequence for a man who poisoned his own wife 7 times? Let us know in the comments below. What sentence should Mason Herring have received? If you want more in-depth true crime cases, stories of betrayal, deception, and justice, make sure to subscribe. We bring you the darkest real-life crimes every week, because in a world where justice isn't always guaranteed, the truth still needs to be told.